Today, we have a very, very unique and special guest, the founder and owner of MindCure, which is a psychedelic and non-psychedelic supplement and I would say science research community in company that is driving the science of psychedelics. Kelsey Ramsden is the owner. She is also a highly successful entrepreneur for years. She was ranked one of the most successful female entrepreneurs in Canada. She has built multiple businesses. She is a cancer survivor, and she has dabbled in quite a bit and dug into a lot of research on the therapeutic side of psychedelic mushrooms, and has also created a company that develops non-psychedelic mushroom products like lion's mane, nootropic-based supplements with reishi and cordyceps and things like that. So today we're going to talk a little bit about supplements and health, a lot about mental health, but we're also going to dive into her journey of psychedelics. So this, for some of you guys listening, is definitely a left turn from our normal fitness conversation, but it relates heavily to health, specifically mental health and just wellness. So there is so much information, experiences, stories, books, research, things coming out on the topic of psychedelics that I found this person to be somebody really, really interesting and influential that I wanted to speak to and really hear their side of the story. So I think you're going to get a lot out of this, even if you're somebody who has no interest or no knowledge, prior knowledge of psychedelics and what they may do or be for. I would highly encourage you to stick around and really give this a listen. It's a fascinating story, and I think more people need to accept that this is a therapeutic medicine that can really change people's lives who have experienced anxiety, fear of death, depression, cancer, all these different things. So it's an amazing topic, a lot of amazing research going on. So I highly encourage everybody to stick around, really listen to this, whether you want to go on a psychedelic journey or not. This is a really great podcast, and I'm excited about how it turned out. So stay tuned and listen in. And as always, if you enjoy this show, do me a couple huge favors. Post a screenshot on your Instagram story, tag myself at Cody McBruin. Make sure you tag MindCure, Kelsey's company, at MindCure, or MindCure Wellness if you want to find their supplements and their products. And as always, subscribe to the channel, whether you're on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure that you get notified that these episodes are dropping, and subscribe to the podcast right now. Without any further ado, let's talk to the one and only psychedelic master, I would call her after this conversation, Kelsey Ramsden. All right, well, I'm excited to get in this one because you're a guest that was brought to my plate, and I got to kind of do my research and dive into what you guys do. And just based on what we just had discussed, I think it's going to open the discussion up a little bit more than I anticipated, but was kind of hoping for that. So I'm excited about this. But before we dive into the topic of today, which is going to be multifaceted, obviously psychedelics, therapeutic, your experience there, and then also MindCure and the product itself and what you guys are doing to change the way people look at these things. Can you fill us in with who you are? Just give us your story in a nutshell, kind of why you are here today, and then we'll kind of spin it from there.
Yeah, great. So I am Kelsey Ramsden. At the moment, I'm called the CEO of MindCure Health. As a general human, I'm a mom of 3 kids. I'm 44 years old. I'm a cancer survivor. I was twice named Canada's top female entrepreneur. I spent, I'd say, like the first 3/4 of my life doing all the things you're kind of like meant to do, jumping the hoops, checking the boxes, ascending the mountaintop, arriving at the place where I was like supposed to feel totally whole with all the things and the pieces of paper and the money and the whatnot, which is awesome. Like I'll keep it still. I'm not giving it up. But instead of feeling whole, I felt hollow. And so I started in my own kind of journey around looking at wellness and health, and what does that mean to an individual person? How do we define like wealth or success? And for me, that led me down, a few roads, ultimately to a place where I became a patient of psychedelic assisted therapy 3 years ago myself. Which, as all these roads and like micro choices we make lead us to new places. Today, I sit as the CEO of a psychedelics company. So if you would have asked me like 10 years ago when I was running a civil construction company building seaports and airports around the world, is this what you'd be doing? I'd say, gee, that would be lovely, but I doubt it.
Yeah.
So that's who I am, and that's kind of how you found me.
I love it. Did the journey into psychedelics and the experiments and the therapeutic side of things, did that start when cancer was diagnosed and that led you to that, or how did that come about?
Oh yeah, good question. So the cancer thing there's like this book called The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know, it's trite. Everybody's kind of heard of it, whatever the case. But I remember, so when I got cancer, I got this type of cancer called glassy cell adenocarcinoma. It appeared in my cervix. And generally, cervical cancer can be like lasered off, not to be TMI for like, your audience, but it's just bodies. We're okay.
Yep.
And I found out that I had it when our youngest, so we have 3 kids, our youngest was 2 months old. And what was fascinating about that experience of the diagnosis was I was like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Cervical cancer, like kind of not a big deal, but friends had it. And then the day after they let me know that, they called and they said, yeah, we actually need you back in right away. So this specific type I had a 17% survival rate. And all of a sudden, like, it all got pretty real. So I was really fortunate. So unfortunate in that type of cancer does not respond to chemo or radiation. Really fortunate in that my surgeon who was on the knife just like went to town and he got all the cancer, and I was gutted and whatever the case. But coming out of that, I remember one of my very first appointments saying to my oncologist, like, is it possible you can see colors brighter after this kind of thing? And he said, no, maybe, but also maybe you're just appreciating being alive.
Mm.
And so that cancer experience for me was like awakening 101, where all of a sudden I started to really appreciate things like that our grandmas tell us, like every day on this side of the grass is a good day, those kind of things that seem like postcard things. But what it really did, actually, it was like this pinnacle high moment, shortly followed by like the greatest low. Because beyond being alive, I was like, wait a minute, I've got one ride on this blue marble hurtling through space. What the hell am I doing with this? Like, I'm working my face off. I probably got cancer because I never slept. I was overstressed. I was over traveled. I was over everything. Had all these like addictive behaviors, was suffering from like all sorts of things I wouldn't address. And it was, it's like the good old look in the mirror moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the beginning of my path to really actually getting well.
Okay.
So, not having cancer was like the smallest component of getting well, actually.
Yeah.
The rest of it was like a very arduous journey, facing a lot of my own storylines and life choices and all these kind of things. And to the point where, it's unpopular to be reasonably successful with lots of awards and on the cover of magazines and things like that. And then you say, I'm not happy. It's like, oh, so sad for you. But the truth of the matter is, it really doesn't matter what all of these things are. If we're not living, waking up and doing the thing we want to do, whether it's when I used to work as a Starbucks barista and I didn't have the money and all the other things and I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
Unhappiness is just unhappiness, man.
Yeah.
So I decided that I would get better, and I did the traditional therapy stuff, and it worked for a bit. It was kind of like, kind of like that little rush you have after you go and you do something, and then it kind of wears off. And I started on the drugs, and I kind of thought, this isn't like, it's helping, but it's not answering the real issue here. And so ultimately I started looking around, like, what else could I do? And I come from, the West Coast of Canada, where there's an openness to alternative medicines. And I had done like, the kind of things a kid would do in college, but I was afraid of doing psychedelics for therapy because it seemed like that's kid stuff. That's the kind of stuff you do in college. Like, you can't be a 40-year-old mother of 3 children running these multi-million-dollar companies and taking mushrooms. Like, that's nuts. So it took me 2 years to convince myself, going into the deep research, like, and very well reputed universities around the world doing this research, Johns Hopkins, USC, Um, there's so many locations, Imperial College, like I could go on and on of these locations that are doing psychedelic research for a variety of indications, whether it's depression, addiction, PTSD. Like, so finally I was like, all right, well, the math is here, girl. You know, if you're going to rely on the science, which I do like to, now I need to find a practitioner that I'm going to trust. You know, I only have one mind. It's about the only asset that I really value. And so I started as a patient 3 years ago, trepidatiously. You know, I was really afraid, in part because of what everyone thinks at the beginning, and probably most of your listeners right now are like, I would never do that, because it's drugs, and it seems like I thought all the things. What if I don't come back the same? Like, what if I have a bad trip? What are all these things? And you know, but then I would go back to the science, and then I go back to the science. And I had to onboard my husband, who's not from the west coast of Canada, you know, who's from a very traditional drugs are bad kind of upbringing. And 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 so I went, and after my first session, and I'm happy to talk about what it's like if you're curious, but after my first session, I remember leaving. I'm on an airplane, I'm flying back, and I'm sitting in this plane. I'm in first class, not because I actually normally travel first class. I just got lucky, and you know when they call your name and you're the guy they pick. So I thought, oh yeah, it's great, and I'm crying, but not the kind of crying where you're actually sobbing, just the kind where like your eyes are leaking, just like I can't stop my body. But it wasn't sadness, and it was the only thing it was just joy. And I hadn't felt that I mean, I'd had it for a minute, but and what started it was that for some random reason, I'm looking in my phone at all these old pictures, I don't know, sentimentality or something. And I come across a picture of myself when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, that I was at home at my folks' place. I took a picture of my picture my mom has on the wall of me as a kid. And I'm looking at this girl, and she's amazing. Like, she's all this potential, and she's full of life, and she's just like such a little boss. And I just for a moment like reconnected with my truest, highest, most clear, most driven, most like ambitious blue sky self. And I just started leaking, man, and it kind of didn't stop. And so that was the beginning of the transformation for me, from like what I would call mental sufficiency to mental wealth.
I love that. I think,
Yeah.
you know, I've talked to a lot of people, and it's funny because I never had a really like a bad stigma towards any of this kind of stuff, just because my upbringing wasn't that way. It was just kind of like, you know, I saw a lot of it growing up, but in a different light. Drugs were never therapeutic. It was
Right.
party, fun, get high. But I had professionals, entrepreneurs, CEOs, friends doing what you're talking about, and swearing by and having these stories, and even some that would say, and I'd be interested in your take on this, is like, oh yeah, I had a really bad trip, but it was exactly what I needed because it taught me the lesson I needed to change my life. And that was a moment where I was like, that is something I've never heard before. And I think I started with the Netflix documentary, which I don't always recommend for education. Go to Netflix, but
Yeah.
the Explain one brought in the people from Johns Hopkins, and I started seeing that side of it. And I was like, okay, there's something to this, and it's just fascinating. But did it take you actually going through the experience, like going in and having a trip? And I would love for you to explain what that was like. But was that the moment where you were like, actually changed your mind and were able to say like, this is not what I thought it was, or a negative thing? It's powerful. It's spiritual. It's
Yeah. I mean, so there's two parts that come to mind when you're talking about this. One is what it's like, and I'll describe that next. The other is like the trip. So I've in my life, I never had a, an air quotes bad trip.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky. I don't know. I was just like, I was always the lucky one who came at the other side. I was like, that was beautiful. I saw some dragons. I don't know, whatever. And it was amazing. And it was always really reaffirming, or I touched the oneness, like all these things you hear people say. And I'll riff on that in a second, which will make it sound less insane. But I had a bad trip this last year. And now I know what people were talking about. And it was terrible. And it was exactly what I needed. And I also know what people are talking about. And so I'll describe the bad and then the good. Like, give me the bad news first.
Yeah.
So the bad trip, some people, and, I don't want to, disclaimer. Nothing I say is something you should go out and do without supervision, all the things that a person would say if they were saying this. But this one particular journey I did in a float tank. And so I'm administered, this particular journey is psilocybin. I'm administered psilocybin. I get in the float tank. The music starts. It's all fine. Lights are out. And I am attacked by these beetles. They're like red. They're like spiky. They're everywhere. It's terrible. And I can't get out and I can't find the light. And I'm like, I'm actually not even moving. But in my mind, I'm thrashing and I'm freaking out. And because my sitter is just right outside the door, like, and then I'm in this metropolis type of a setting, and I'm running almost like Godzilla. Like, I'm kind of watching this movie, and there's all these people and they're screaming and the place starts on fire. Like, it couldn't have been more of a, like, just a red, fiery nightmare. And the whole time I'm trying to save all these people. And I'm like, what is it? Like, they're like vapor. My arms are going through them. I can't actually grasp them. And at some point I kind of come to enough, and then my sitter, I must have said something, and she opened the door. She's like, "You're okay." I was like, "No, you got to get me out of here. Like, I got to make this stop. You got to get the stuff off me." And so, of course, once you're out of the tank and you're standing upright, the lights are all on and the music is off, and you can kind of come to and come back. And I started journaling, and I realized that the lesson I really needed at that moment was, like, I've spent so much of my life being responsible or feeling responsible to save all the people, and feeling like I'm the last resort. Like, if it's Cody and Kelsey in the fox den, I'm going to be the first guy out. And I'm going to, like, this warrior thing in me that's always on and always on defense. And it tied into, like, this challenge I was having in a relationship around, like, really being present and loving and being soft and caring. And so I was so afraid of it. And it's so much easier to be the warrior, that for me, than it is, and this whole thing was just like, if you really want what you say that you want, all of this fighting and all of this saving and all of this, like, torture is not going to get you what you really need. Oh, it's terrible. It was the worst ever. But within an hour of being out the other side, I was like, of course, thank you. It's so obvious.
Yeah. I think, if you can have a bad experience like that and still come out on the other side and tell people that this is a smart thing to use for your brain, I think that alone says a lot, because there's not many people that will encourage nightmares, but I think if there is something on the other end and you can provide that to people to grow, it's almost like it's going to show you something that you can't see otherwise. Would that be a good way of explaining it?
That's exactly it. It's like, I always say it's like glasses. Like, I can take these glasses I'm wearing off right now. I look out, we live on a golf course. I can see the golf course. But as soon as I put on a new lens here, I can see it way more clearly. Mm. And the interesting thing about psychedelics is it does something called, it downgrades your default mode network, meaning it kind of takes that hard ego piece. And I don't mean ego like bravado. I mean, like, who I am and all my protection mechanisms and all that. And it just, like, dials it down from, say, a 10 to a 2. So I'm still here. I'm still me. but I don't need to save anyone. I don't need to make anyone wrong. I don't need to make myself wrong. And so we were able to kind of watch this whole thing unfold like a movie. Just like I'm just a witness. And what's really amazing about that is when you're able to just witness a thing, you can forgive a lot of things. You could see a lot of things you know, to your point, that you didn't see otherwise. And I would say that most of my, you know, my super positive, joyous journeys have been watching, funnily enough, watching movies that otherwise I probably would have been upset by. But seeing, you know, one of them was a situation where something really bad happened to me when I was younger. And I saw it, and I saw myself in it, and I saw the other person who was involved. And I felt their pain. I didn't feel my own. I felt what they were feeling when that was happening. And it just was like, it's a horrific thing, but to be able to feel for someone else in that way and to be able to forgive and to go through those things, like, again, it's just like watching a movie. And I would say for anyone who's listening to who's thinking like, okay, so what? You go in 4 hours later, you feel better, like that sounds fine. I would just say, you know, as a person who's relatively well experienced in psychotherapy, and you'll hear a lot of people talk about it. It is really like 10 years of therapy in a day. If you're willing, it's not just the trip. It's then what are you going to do now that you've seen those things or felt those things or understood those things? So now you have to come back, you know, on any given Tuesday to your house, to your job, to your all your regular life. And none of that changed, just you. Mm-hmm. So that's where, like, you know, if you want to take on psychedelics or any kind of therapy, I would say, you know, be ready to have the courage to show up for yourself, because you'll get it. And then you have to be willing to, you know, use it. It's like you get a superpower. Now you can fly. You want to use it?
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard the ego thing many times. I've heard this idea of like being able to forgive and let go and accept what is a lot from different people. So and I think that the other thing I hear a lot about is more of a spiritual side of things, of like almost like understanding what God really is and things like that. And that's the interesting thing about, I mean, I've read books, I've listened to tons of interviews. I've actually done quite a bit of homework on this topic because it's very fascinating to me.
Cool.
I'm yet to do any type of trip, but obviously it's intriguing me. But
right,
there's those three things from person to person to person to person, all of which who have no idea who each other are. And I think that's the most fascinating thing. Like, why are all these people saying the same things if they don't even know that each other are saying it? They're all in these different areas of the world.
This is the thing. This is the thing that I kind of get a bit like, I remember going into it being like, yeah, okay, that stuff's for hippies. And, you know, like it's all about love and the oneness and whatnot. And, but to your point, that's one of the very first things after my first like heroic dose, or flood dose, what do we want to call it? Coming out and being like, oh my goodness, I know what they're talking about. And how is it that we all have this similar experience? It's kind of like, you know, when people talk about if they died and then they came back and they all saw the white light, it's kind of like that kind of must happen, because there's, you know, maybe 800 people who all saw the white light who didn't know each other. Like, why say you saw it if you didn't?
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I was supposed to see or feel or do. I just went and, you know, became one with the universe, and came back and I was like, wow, that was different, you know?
Yeah.
In fact, in my first session ever, I recorded it, my phone.
Oh, wow.
Voice note, put it beside me. And after about 4 hours, I said to the sitter, I was like, I don't really know. I think I've just been sleeping for 4 hours. And he was like, yeah, you might want to listen to your tape in a couple hours when you're fully grounded. All right. And I listened to this tape, and I'm talking the whole time. the entire, I was like, I would not shut up. And right in the middle, I talk and I'm describing, what it's all about. And that it's all about love. And it's all about, our connection to the oneness in the universe and energy, neither being created nor destroyed, and my ancestors being a part of my physiology and living through me. And there's like really things that I was like, is that me? If I didn't know myself, I wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
But to your point, this universal experience is very much there, and it is transformative. So, I don't know what to tell you other than to tell you that if you are fortunate enough to get one of those kind of movies, you can become one with the universe and really change how you see everything.
I would be, and I don't know how much of this you know or can dive into, but one of the things that it was actually just like an image that I saw. It was moving, it was video, it was motion, but it was basically like the brain, and then it was showing the wiring of the brain just kind of going nuts when you go through
Yeah,
the experience. Um, I'd be really curious to know about that process and how much of that is like temporary. So how much of that is like in the active moment this is happening and showing you things, and how much of it is it like really rewiring your brain for future benefits and growth and everything, right? Because I think one of the things that I saw with the John Hopkins was a cancer patient who had this extreme fear of death and remission, and because the likelihood of him getting it again was pretty high, they said. So he basically was crippled by anxiety every day, fear of death, until he did this with John Hopkins, and then he never feared it again. So to me, there's got to be something going on that isn't just, and even like if you look at most drugs or alcohol, it's not something that like, yeah, I do it every 6 to 12 months. I do it every few months or whatever. It's usually like, oh, this is every week, this is every day, because I do it a
yeah,
lot. Or a lot of these people, they're like every once a year I go on a trip, or once every 6 months, and it's something like that. And to me, that means it's not an addictive thing they're doing. It's something that it's changing who they are over time, if that makes sense. I'd love to hear more about that.
totally. So I can touch a little bit on the science, a little bit on the research, and then a little bit on the long-term effects and the piece around how often. So yeah, so when you're hooked up, when they're doing this research and they're hooking people's brains up, and you do see connections between areas of the brain that aren't otherwise connected under your normal state. So you see hemispheric, cross hemispheric connections, all these type of things. And so part of that is experienced in the body by when you're in these trips. So you may see colors and you may have these distortions, and you have audio distortion, you have all these kind of new sensory experiences. And so these are cross brain connections that don't normally happen. So those pathways are opened up. On the second piece, when we're talking about the research, and to your point, what do we know about the actual long-term effects and how that changes the brain? And when the early part of psychedelic research happened, we just didn't have the tools to measure it. So in the 60s and the 50s, 60s, we just didn't have the tools to measure the mind in the way that we do now. But there is reason to believe, and early studies that are showing that the use of some of these medicines, namely psilocybin, LSD, to a lesser extent, potentially ibogaine, MDMA, actually show neuroregeneration. So the development of new pathways and or the solidification of those previously kind of shut down, they put the top cap on the pipe pathways. And interestingly, depending on the indication, so for example, if we're talking about ibogaine and addiction, you can go down to some places in Mexico, for example, are getting outcomes like 74% cure rate of opiate addiction with a one-time treatment of ibogaine. So you
Wow.
go like, I mean, an ibogaine trip is not a 10-minute situation. I think you're kind of in for about 12 hours and sometimes even, more than a day. No withdrawals, and you come out without any cravings. And that sticks
Wow.
for some time, long enough for you to, potentially develop new rituals and habits. Or you can look at, for example, psilocybin. So to your point, do people go back and do ibogaine every weekend? No, it's not a thing. If it was, we'd all be doing it on a Friday. You've never done ibogaine on a Friday, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um, And psilocybin is another great example in that you don't often hear about people, if ever, being like, I do mushrooms every single day to the degree to which I can't tell if I'm here or I'm touching the oneness. No, man, like no one does that because it just simply is not addictive. And I think the bigger point is that it's not desirable because it can be hard, or it can be glorious. And for the most part, a lot of those experiences, we get hurt in community and we heal in community. And so a lot of these experiences, when they really last and land, take part when you're with other people who are also healing. So on a Friday night, when you're doing some mushrooms with your buddy, you're having a good giggle and a laugh and, walking downtown. You're not really there to heal. So you don't really get the kind of effect that's so bonding with these molecules. And, once you've seen enough, like you can only process so much. So once every 6 months seems quite reasonable. And so some of these drugs have that kind of built into their molecular kind of how they bind and how they stick around and their lasting effect. And it really does depend, I think, on the individual. So there are some drugs that are not good for some folks. If you have a history of disassociation or, personality disorder, psilocybin is not your friend. Don't go and do that stuff. But I think with good screening in the right container, this research is really showing us long-term effect that's maintained and some material changes to the physiology of how our minds are actually working and performing. And I think, of interest to your audience would be people who do combat sports, all the TBI folks, the hockey players up here in Canada who have it. Well, even like these football players. I was just reading a thing the other day about, sadly, a number of former pro NFLers who've taken their own lives, and a couple of them who actually did it by shooting themselves in the chest so that their brains could be autopsied because they knew something was wrong with their brain. It wasn't them that was depressed. There's something wrong with my brain. The UFC has just taken on funding some of this psychedelic research. So as much as people can kind of look at psychedelics and think it's out here, there is something that's happening. The research is being funded and it's being done in a really rigorous way. And never before have we had solutions that prove out this kind of every 6 months or once a year kind of situation. Everything we have right now is like pop a pill every day as a little reminder of how, you're just tiny bit broken. And it doesn't get to the root.
Yeah. I think the hardest selling point or buying point for some of these people that are call them old school or against it or just grew up around anti-drugs and stuff like that is like, when you say it changed my life, all this positive stuff, I had this glorious trip and there was dragons flying. That's where people go, oh, okay. And they kind of roll their eyes. But to me, all I needed to see was the Johns Hopkins thing. That was the first hospital I saw doing any kind of research. And I was just immediately sucked in like, holy shit, this is clearly something legit. And I think it's hopefully only a matter of time before it becomes controlled enough to where it's a more easily accessible thing for people who are experiencing these issues or depression or anxiety or anything like that, to get what they need.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the greatest challenges and why I'm always a little bit leery of telling the whole truth is because when people come back and evangelize a thing, you're always like, okay, sure, it's the most amazing thing that ever happened. I'm sure about that. But here's the thing I would just reckon with, which is that we know that data moves science, right? John Hopkins and all the studies that they're doing, the people at UC, all these people are driving us the data to move the science, which will get the FDA approval across a multiplicity of these medicines. But we also know that story moves culture. And we know that when stories are told right by the right storytellers, and we can trust in their vantage point, So no offense to the folks in, 1969 who were at Woodstock and doing their thing, but the way that they told the story of transformation, you know, society couldn't buy the storyteller. But now when you hear people, lots of, to your point earlier, executives, like 44-year-old mother of 3 children who's been around a little bit, and, the more we get these stories of people, NFLers, like people who have cherished and honored their body and their physique to the highest degree and would never put anything bad in the machine, who are like, the machine is damaged, this is what's going to solve it. I would just invite the people who are kind of naysayers to look at, who are the storytellers now? Are they to be believed? And I feel like the answer is moreover and more often, yes. And of course, who wants to say that they were transformed overnight? Like, that sounds bizarro.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, like, that's just the truth.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. It's one of those things too, where I even think about, this is to a much lesser degree, but I started in the fitness space and kind of on my entrepreneurial journey at a really young age. So when I first started like getting intrigued by meditation, I was
Yeah.
maybe 20 years old, right? And I was like, meditation? I'm not going to sit there on a rug with my legs crossed, humming, because that's what I think. And then you learn a little bit. You're like, oh, maybe it's more than that. But what it took for me was seeing successful entrepreneur after entrepreneur after entrepreneur after entrepreneur saying that they meditate every single day. And after a while, it was like, okay, like there's no mistake by all these people saying the same thing, all these people agreeing on the same benefits, and all these people being highly successful individuals in whatever they're doing using the same tactic. And I think, like you're saying, it's only a matter of time before that happens, because that's going on right now.
Yeah, it's the signal and the noise, absolutely. And I think meditation is a perfect example, man, because I was the same way. I was like, okay, it's going to take up a bunch of my time.
Mm.
Not like it's hard, apparently. Why would I ever want to do something that's apparently impossible to do? Um, but can we measure it? So here's what I love about meditation, though. If you go and you put on your Whoop band or your Aura ring or your whatever, your Apple Watch or whatever, your, pick your poison, and you look at what happened to you while you meditated, pre, post, during, like, it's just math.
Yeah.
The same with psychedelics. Like, what we're building with Mind Cure is a measurement system, effectively, that's meant to be the backbone of the role of psychedelics, and it's all just that. Because we can tell these great stories all we want, but until we get the quantified medicine where people can look at the before and the after and the during and see what specifically happened to me, like, give me the moment,
Mm-hmm.
give me the molecule, tell me why and how, because none of us are fools, you know and we all want this, like, highly personalized, how is it going to work for me piece. So yes, all the other successful folks were meditating, but you needed to see for yourself that it worked for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the one fine day that you had the moment where you're like, wait a minute, how long have I been here? You're like, oh, okay, meditation. There
Yeah.
was something here after all. uh so I think the same is going to apply with psychedelics, is that we need to get the measurements down to the masses for you yourself, to go, how was my body performing before? What's my HRV look like? What's my resting heart rate look like? What's my sleep pattern, my stress levels? What's my sentiment? And then after, and show me the proof.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what, and what I was going to say is that, the experience people have drives the science to be done, and the science gives us the data that is proof for people. And
100%.
even going back to what you said earlier of like, you kind of have to be in the right place to go through it. Like that was for me with meditation. Even like, I actually didn't buy into it until, I mean, I kind of thought, but I never truly gave it a try until I was at a retreat where like we had to get rid of our phones, do all this stuff. I was actually sitting, it was in San Diego, I was sitting on a rock on this big hill. We had to hike up this big thing and separate to do this meditation practice. And I was sitting on a rock looking over this thing, and I closed my eyes meditating. But when I woke up, there was, I believe it was a hummingbird just right in front of my face, like scary close, but I didn't move, and it was still, and it was the most still I've ever felt. But that was what I needed to be like, I know what stillness is now, and I get it. Right. And I think putting myself into a certain spot environment experience. I had to fly to another state to go through this thing. Like, but that's what I needed, and it changed my life for the better. So I think, I mean, you're hitting on a lot of points that I really, this is cool because these are all things that I've thought and wondered, but I haven't been able to sit with somebody and have them give me reassurance on. So I appreciate all of that so much. But I
Can we
do,
jam? Can we
yeah,
jam on something with meditation just real quick before we
yeah,
move on? Because I
yeah.
think your audience might jam on this too. So before I got into the whole psychedelics thing, I went to San Diego
Mm.
to this meditation retreat. But we shot sniper rifles.
Oh,
So meditating and shooting guns. And everyone's like, that's nuts. What are you talking about? So this guy that I met, Dr. Doug Brackman, he had this kind of practice with Navy SEALs. They'd come back and they'd be having a hard time. And he was teaching them to meditate, same as you. They're like, meditation, what have you. So he added some guns because, like, okay, well, maybe with guns. So long story short, and this was really my first time really believing in meditation. I'm there, I'm on this hillside, I'm overlooking this beautiful, like, vista, etc. And we're meant to meditate and then come and shoot the sniper rifle and then go meditate and shoot meditation. So we start in the morning. And my first shot is like, I don't even know how far off. Some ridiculous, like, terrible. It's not even like, it's ridiculous. I'm like, oh, this is really working. I'm so glad I spent all this money and flew here. So then I keep going and I'm iterating and I'm iterating. And throughout the course of the day, I'm getting better at meditating and getting quiet and getting centered, etc. And so we started at say 8 in the morning. And by about noon, I'm shooting at 600 yards. Something the size of a milk jug, like a one liter milk container, every single time. I'm like, what just happened to me? Then 900 yards by like 3 in the afternoon. I cannot miss. Like, I actually can't do it. So we have this debrief afterwards about why is it that these higher states of functioning, these ultimate moments of clarity, which is the same thing that for me came out of psychedelics, which drives me to continue to do it every 6 months to a year for high performance. Now we're talking about performance behavior, not just like sufficiency, but performance. Coming out of meditation, coming out of mindfulness, coming out of psychedelic work is this state of, I've already seen it happen. I have so much competence and confidence in myself in this like pure, calm sense that you can control your body. Like, you can get your breathing just perfect so that when you pull that trigger, you cannot help but win. It was far and away the most transformative meditative. So if anybody ever wants to, like, you go and shoot some sniper rifles and meditate, and I mean, you'll be a believer for sure.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think it's ultimately, like, if I look back at any periods of times where I performed at a high level in my life and in my performance in the gym or my marriage or my business, everything, it's always when I have an extreme amount of clarity on
Yeah.
who I am and what I want. And I think ultimately that's all about. And even with like the psychedelics, what intrigued me is that it's like, if I can have more of that constantly, always, like that's something that intrigues me. So the thing I want to shift gears to is your business now. Is like, okay, we just talked about this extremely fascinating journey and all these benefits and everything, all the things selfishly I wanted to discuss. At this point, what do you do now with your business, and where is there, because you mentioned you own a psychedelic company, are there multiple chapters? I know MindCure is, we have nootropics and non-psychedelic mushrooms and things that are lion's mane, reishi, things like that, which I would love to get into the benefits, because we can actually be like, hey, people, order these things because they are going to benefit you. But is there another chapter that you do on the more psychedelic side? Can you just kind of give us the rundown of all that?
Yeah, I'll give you 3 pieces that matter. One is, we of course we do nootropics and adaptogens. I'll riff on that for a second. We're building a digital therapeutics platform that'll be the backbone of the role of psychedelics, and there'll be B2B, so us servicing clinics and psychedelic locations, and then a component piece that's B2C for the DIY trippers. And then
Love that.
I know, isn't that bizarre? That's like actually a category. Uh, I don't like to call them that, but that's how it gets presented to me. And then the third piece is around novel research. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But something I want to let all your listeners know is a little bit of like what's legal, where, and how, and when.
Yeah.
So that anybody who right now is like, okay, so wait a minute, what are we talking about when we're talking about psychedelic therapy? Right now in America and Canada, something called ketamine assisted therapy is legal. So you can find ketamine infusion locations. And predominantly, ketamine is utilized to combat depression, predominantly. And there, just hit the good old Google, you'll find what you need there.
Yeah.
We're talking about psilocybin, magic mushrooms, as they were formerly known. Oregon, like there are a number of states who've been really progressive. So you're going to see psilocybin probably be legal for controlled psychedelic assisted therapy, meaning you're not going to buy it like at the corner head shop. You're going to buy it, like you're going to get it from a therapist by I think 2023, 2024. So we're not too far away from that. Up in Canada, you can get special access provisions for psilocybin, but full rollout probably at the same timeline. MDMA, 22, 23, probably. So these things are coming, and they're coming relatively quickly, and some stuff's already legal. Now you can fly outside of your country and go and get all sorts of things in all sorts of other locations where they are legal and that kind of thing. So I think I just want to lay that out for the people who are listening, or they're like, is this even where is this?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, no problem. And then, when we talk about our minds, so look, most of us are focused neck down, optimization, right? I'm taking my vitamin C's, I'm doing my omega-3s, I'm doing my, my DHEAs, I'm doing all these things, I'm working out, I'm sleep maximizing. I'm like, but no one is doing mental hygiene. Like, it's like brushing your teeth. You brush your teeth every day. What about your brain? What's happening?
Yeah.
Like, pretty much nothing. Maybe you drink coffee. That's about as pro as most people are getting on their neck up maintenance plan. And the way that I see that, again, like I've dropped this line a couple times, this idea of like sufficiency is not sufficient for people who want to perform. Mental wealth is going beyond just getting by. Yeah. And so for me, that's the introduction of nootropics and adaptogens. Those are things that affect your mind, but they're called psychoactive. They're not psychedelic. So you're not going to trip. You're not going to see anything weird. You're probably not even going to experience the cup of coffee buzz. You're going to notice, depending on the mushroom. So there's Reiki and turkey tail and lion's mane and cordyceps, and there's all sorts of mushrooms. And I won't belabor the point on what every single one does. But I will say that you will notice over time greater focus or greater creativity. Some offer immunoprotection. And again, they're not going to change your state. You're still going to drive your car. Everything's going to be fine. But they are going to offer you that like neck up mental hygiene, just the neuro supports. They're totally legal. And in Canada, actually pretty regulated. So it's quite a procedure to get through to be able to sell them. And so that's kind of the first level, is how are you supporting your mind every single day? Think about it. You might want to consider doing something about it. It's easy to do. And then the second piece of what we do at MindCure, like I say, is a digital therapeutics piece, which is a more data-backed and science-driven, say, Calm app type of a thing.
Okay.
When you're going to go for psychedelic-assisted therapy, another one of our products is a pre and post psychedelic supplement. So we'll pre-sup you. We're going to get you a wearable. We're going to baseline you. We're going to help support the therapist during the session. We're even designing something like I think is really pretty smashing. Music is pretty important when you're in session. And we're designing an AI-backed music playlist effectively. So like if for you get calm when you listen to Metallica, and I don't get calm when I listen to Metallica, but the therapist wants to drive you to a state of calm, the AI can tell by virtue of the wearable and how your body's responding if we're driving it calm. And it will continue to adapt the music to get you to calm, and then to get you to elated, and then to get you to, you know, tension in it.
Yeah.
So we're building this, so we're building this like digital therapeutics app, for lack of a better term, so that we can help people get the most out of their psychedelic experiences. And again, get this quantified medicine piece. And then the final piece of what we do at MindCure is, you know, research, because the data is going to get the legalization. And you know, at the moment we're semi in dark ops. Closer to the end of the month, we'll be talking more broadly about what we're doing. But I can share this, which is there's a lot of great work to be done with psychedelics, and a lot of it is focused on mood. And there's a lot of things that happen as a result of, you know, geez, being human. And there's something that I think is have you ever heard the term, I'm sure you have, sex, drugs, and rock and roll?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just one of those things that we're not going to be focused on. And we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah. That's amazing. I think when I hear you talk, because you know, at first I started digging in. I'm like, oh, okay, it's a nootropic company, and then I started kind of reading more, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, they do a little more than that. Oh, wait, there's a little bit more. So I think to me, it's almost like you guys are more passionate and focused on bringing science and awareness to this entire world or category versus just creating a supplement for people. Would that be accurate?
That's wholly accurate. I mean, I think when I think about it, I think we have to build the medicine for the market. That's research and all this science. But we have to build a market for the medicine. And when a lot of people are still not yet ready to take on a full psychedelic experience, and a lot of people haven't even considered taking care of their brains.
Yeah.
So we have to start here and go, you know, let's talk about some neuro supports. Let's talk about some adaptogens. And then once people go, oh, I can adapt my mind, I can high performance this brain here and treat it like an actual, like I can put fuel into the Lamborghini and drive it like that. That's good.
Yeah.
But you know, what other kind of fuel you got? And so that's really the way that we're approaching this, is being the kind of end-to-end provider, so that people are, you know, MindCure wants to be the company that people trust with their minds. Because all the way back to the beginning of my story, that was my biggest hurdle, was I have one mind. It's my greatest asset. Who am I going to trust it to?
Yeah.
And so everything we're doing is just based on that, helping people slowly move towards mental wealth in a really measured way, where it's tangible, quantified, personalized, and well-researched.
I love that. Yeah, I think you explained the supplement side really well. And I agree, like it's smart to start there and build from that. But I think that, you know, and this is in my industry too, like even I think of something like creatine, which is a performance supplement. Nobody takes creatine and feels creatine, right? But there's so much science on it that it's like, yes, if you want to be stronger and recover faster, take creatine. Just keep doing it. So, you know, for those listening, it's the same thing with all these adaptogens and different types of extracts from mushrooms. And I'm somebody who has supplement with lion's mane, cordyceps, not turkey tail yet, but reishi, like all those things every day for a long time. I actually just recently ran out of what I was taking. So it's something I trust. And I think that for me, it was always one of those things where, going back to what I said earlier and kind of how you're talking about, like almost just being optimal instead of average, I was like, well, if all these things are going to give me just like even a percent difference that I don't notice, but after a year, I'm that much better, that much clearer, that much smarter, that much more productive, then why the hell would I not take it? You know? So I think, it's one of those things that just gives you that slight edge. Like why not? You know?
I agree. It's just science.
Yep.
Why
Yep.
not?
Exactly.
Easy.
I love what you guys are doing so much. This has been an awesome podcast. This was way more fun than I anticipated. So thank you for everything you brought. Can you tell everybody where to find your guys' work, if you have some social media platforms to follow, where to get your supplements, all that kind of stuff, just so they can kind of stay tuned and dig into more of it?
100%. So MindCure, just MINDCURE.com, the at MindCure at all the other places. On Insta, I think if you want to look for the supplements, go to MindCure Wellness and you'll see that there. And Yeah, I mean, we're always on the socials and looking to connect with folks, and always happy to answer questions, because I know psychedelics and nootropics and all these things are, new to some people, and there's never a dumb question. We're happy to be here, happy to be of service, happy to bring people into mental wealth.
I love it. I love it. And even if you're listening and you're like, maybe this was like complete left field for you. You weren't somebody that was looking into this stuff. Know that I wasn't somebody that was looking for it. It just kind of kept falling in my lap, being in the health and wellness space. And if you never have any anticipation of doing it or needing it, it's still such an amazing and fascinating thing, changing people's lives. So I encourage you to just do some research. It's a really cool thing. And I think if for no other reason, again, whether you ever do it ever, just so there's not a bad stigma on it, because it's really changing people. And I think that's the most important thing. So even for the people who are like, that's not for me, just support it, do your research so you aren't against it. Because I think that alone is a big help.
Best point, man. Absolutely, 100%. This is
So
it. Just come to understand it.
yeah. So, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it a lot. This is fun.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. Pleasure.